At 68, I slept in my truck behind a hardware store with a security light buzzing over my head. Everything I built in 41 years was gone in one afternoon, and the whole time one question kept me awake. Why did my wife hand me back my own pen and tell me to keep it right before she threw me out? The last thing I ever signed at that kitchen table was one sheet of paper. 11 lines and a signature block at the bottom. My wife slid it across the wood the way she had slid 1,000 documents in 34 years of marriage. Estelle handled the paperwork, I handled the concrete. That was the arrangement, and it had worked since 1984. The kitchen was warm. Early October light coming sideways through the window over the sink. I had been at the Masonboro site all morning, and my boots were still on. Estelle had a rule about boots in the kitchen. She said nothing. I thought she was being kind. I took the pen out of my shirt pocket. A flat brass carpenter's marker, the kind you use to draw a cut line on lumber. She gave it to me when I was 27, the day I signed my first commercial contract. $81,000 signed on the hood of my truck because I did not have an office yet. I signed the page. I did not read it. I am not saying that to excuse myself. Everything that came after grew out of that one fact. I had signed 3,000 documents in 41 years and read almost none because the person handing them to me was my wife. I set the pen down. Estelle picked it up. She turned it over once between her fingers. Then she pushed it back across the wood toward me. "Keep it," she said. "You're going to need it." She took her keys out of her purse, set them beside my hand, and told me I had 4 hours to get my things out of the house. 3 hours and 40 minutes later, I was sitting in my truck behind a hardware store on Castle Street, with everything I owned in the bed under a blue tarp. 2 in the morning. A security light buzzed and flickered, and every time it flickered, the whole lot went gray and came back. 68 years old. 41 years in commercial construction. 211 completed projects, sleeping in a truck. The pen was in my shirt pocket. I could feel it against my chest every time I breathed. I sat there 3 hours and did not think about the house or the money. I thought about that pen, about the way she turned it over in her fingers and chose to give it back. "Keep it. You're going to need it." Why would a woman throwing her husband out of his own house hand him a gift? I did not understand it that night. It took me 11 months to understand why. By then, everything she thought she'd stolen was gone. But that is the end, and I am telling this wrong. To understand what happened, you have to go back to the first signature in the chain that mattered. 18 months earlier. Cape Fear Landing was the biggest job Haynes Commercial Construction ever took. Mixed-use waterfront 4 buildings, retail below and residential above on the river, where the old shipping terminals used to be. I was on site the morning it started. 6:40, standing in the mud in a hard hat watching a concrete truck back toward the forms for the first pour. Remy Martinez came across the site with his coffee. My foreman for 23 years. Built like a fence post, the only man I ever worked with who could look at a wall and tell you it was out of plumb by a 1/4 inch without touching a level. "Pour's good," he said. Slump came back at 4. "Four's fine. Four's fine." He drank his coffee. "Rebar came in yesterday. We ordered 40 ton. They dropped 70. I looked at him. 70? 70. Signed for by somebody at the office. I called it in. Girl on the phone said the order came through the way it came through and it's already invoiced. I remember thinking I would call the office and straighten it out. Somebody keyed a wrong number. It happens. That was the first thread hanging off the sweater, and I had it between my fingers on a Tuesday morning in April, 18 months before I slept in my truck. And I let go of it. I made a note on the drawings to call about the rebar and went to check the forms. I called the office at 11. Estelle picked up on the 4th ring, already talking to somebody when she answered. I could hear it. That half second where the mouth is still finishing a sentence to one person before it starts a new one for another. Haynes Commercial. "Oh, Sal. Who's that? Who's what?" "You were talking to somebody." "I'm always talking to somebody, honey. I'm at work." Papers moved. "What do you need?" I told her about the rebar. She said she would look into it. She looked into it. That afternoon she called back and said the supplier had made an error, that she had caught it, that a credit was already issued, and that I should not worry because that was what she was there for. I said, "Thank you." I said, "Honey, I don't know what I'd do without you." I meant every word. And I was about to find out. Here is what I know now. There was no credit. There was no supplier error. 30 tons of rebar left that yard on a truck and went somewhere, and I paid for it. And where it went was not any job site with my name on it. That is what a fraud looks like from the inside on the day it starts. It does not look like anything. It looks like a wrong number on an invoice and a wife who fixes it before lunch. At 2:30, a black Range Rover came down the access road and parked at the edge of the site. A man got out in a white shirt with no jacket and boots that had never been in mud, and he came across the gravel with his hand already out. I want to tell you what I thought when I saw him because it matters. I thought, there is the man who is going to save this company. His name was Lachlan West, and he shook my hand like he'd been waiting all week to do it. Sal Haynes. He held on half a second longer than a handshake needs. I've been hearing your name for 6 years, and I finally get to put a face on it. 55, maybe? Silver at the temples, done on purpose, the kind of man who is tan in April. He looked at the site behind me and said, "That's a good pour. You know concrete." I know nothing about concrete. He grinned. But I know what a good crew looks like from the parking lot, and yours doesn't have anybody standing around. 41 years in this business, and I will tell you the truth. That got me. Not the money he was about to offer, that sentence. Because it was true, and because nobody had said it out loud to me in a long time. West Coastal Group had 3 projects going between Wilmington and Southport. He wanted a contractor he didn't have to babysit. Said he'd been burned twice by outfits that bid low and change-ordered him to death, and somebody at the permit office told him if he wanted a man who finished what he started, he should drive out to Cape Fear Landing. We stood in the mud 40 minutes. He asked good questions and listened to the answers. When I said a schedule was tight, he didn't argue, which developers almost never do. Before he left, he said, "Come to dinner. Bring your wife. I want her to see the numbers before you say yes to anything. Because I've learned the hard way that the person who runs the books is the person you actually have to convince." I laughed. I said, "You've got that right. I have gone back to that sentence more times than is good for a man." He said it in April, on a job site with his hand still warm from shaking mine. He was not guessing. He already knew who ran my books. He had known for some time. Dinner was that Friday, at a place on Water Street with white cloth on the tables. Estelle wore the green dress. She'd bought it 2 months earlier, and I remember thinking that night I couldn't recall where she'd worn it the first time. She was good that night. She had the West Coastal financials printed and tabbed before the appetizers came. She asked about retainage schedules and lien waivers and draw requests, and she caught 2 things in his contract language she wanted changed, and he agreed to both without a fight. Walking out to the truck, she took my arm and said, "Sal, this is the one. This is the one that gets us out from under." We'd been under a while. Haynes Commercial came through the 2008 crash by the fingernails, and there were 4 years where I paid my crew before I paid myself. Fine is not the same as easy, and I was 66 that April doing the arithmetic men my age do. How many more jobs? How many more winters on a roof? So when my wife took my arm in that parking lot and told me this was the one, I did not hear a woman selling me something. I heard my wife. We signed with West Coastal in May. The first 11 months were the best of my working life. I want that on the record because of what comes after. Payments came early. Not on time. Early. Lachlan sent money ahead twice when a material price spiked, and I never had to call and ask. Word gets around when a developer pays like that. I hired 9 men that year. Bought a second boom lift. Remy got a raise he tried to turn down. And I was happy. That is the part I have trouble saying out loud. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table and told my wife we'd been lucky to find him. She would say, we were due. The trouble started so small that nobody flagged it. Not me, not Remy, Not a man who spent his life catching quarter-inch problems before they became 6-inch problems. There was a change order on the Oleander Medical Building. Additional structural steel, $41,000. It came through with the week's paperwork on a Thursday. Estelle brought it out to the site on a clipboard, and I signed it against the fender of my truck. "Steel's going up," she said. "Everybody's got the same problem," I said. "Here's the thing about a change order. It's not a contract. It's an amendment. It says the job changed, and here's what the change costs. And once both sides sign, the number is the number." That one was real. The steel went in. I watched it go in. The second came 6 weeks later. $63,000. Below-grade waterproofing at the Masonboro site. I signed that one in the truck at 7 in the morning with the heater running. Waterproofing goes in before the backfill. By the time you sign the paperwork, the dirt is already on top of it. There is no way to look at a finished foundation and tell what's under the soil unless you dig it up. And nobody digs it up because that costs more than the waterproofing did. I did not think about any of that at 7 in the morning with the heater running. I thought 63,000. That's about right for that square footage. And I signed it. That is the one. If you take nothing else from this, take that. The steel one was real, and it taught me the change orders were real. The waterproofing one was the first that was not, and I signed it the same way in the same handwriting against the same fender 6 weeks apart. That is how it is done. You are not tricked once. You are trained. By August, there were 9 of them. By October, Estelle was staying at the office past 9. And in November, on a Tuesday, Remy Martinez came to find me at the trailer at the end of the day, with his hard hat in his hand, which he never did. And he stood in the doorway and did not come in. "Sal," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not get mad at me." I told him to come in and sit down. He came in. He did not sit down. 23 years. I had been to his daughter's wedding. He had been at the hospital the night my mother died. In 23 years, Remy Martinez had never once stood in a doorway holding his hat. "Ask it," I said. "The waterproofing at Masonboro." He turned the hat over. "Who put it in Coastal Envelope Systems? Out of Leland. I know Coastal Envelope. I called them." He looked at the floor, and then he looked at me. "They never worked that site, Sal. The trailer had a space heater going. I remember the sound it made. You called a subcontractor. I called a guy I've known 20 years. You called a subcontractor on my job without telling me." "Yeah," he said. "I did. I want to tell you what I felt right then, because I have never been able to make it look better than it was. I felt embarrassed, not worried, not curious, embarrassed that my foreman had gone behind my back to check paperwork my wife had prepared, that he had found something, and that he was standing in my trailer holding his hat because he knew what he was implying and was going to make me say it out loud. "Say the rest," I said. "I don't want to say the rest." "Say it." He looked at me a long moment. "I counted the rebar in April. I counted pallets in June. There's a bill in the office for $11,000 of poly sheeting that never came through my gate. And now there's $63,000 of waterproofing on a foundation I backfilled myself, and I'm telling you, nobody waterproofed it." The heater ticked. "You backfilled it yourself?" "With my own machine." "Then you'd have seen it." "That's what I'm saying to you. Here is where I made the decision that cost me everything. And I made it in about 4 seconds in a construction trailer in November with a space heater running. Remy, Estelle's had those books 31 years. He didn't say anything. 31 years, I said. She's caught things I missed that would have sunk us. The bonding error in '98, the payroll thing in 2006. I'm not saying she did anything. You're standing in my trailer telling me a document my wife prepared is a lie. I'm telling you what's in the ground, he said. That's all I ever tell you. That's my whole job. That's my whole job. 23 years of a man telling me what was in the ground, and every time he'd been right, and every time I'd listened, I did not listen. Go home, Remy. He stood there a few seconds. Then he put his hat on and said, "Okay, Sal," and went out and closed the door soft behind him. And I sat in that trailer angry, And I want you to understand who I was angry at, not Remy. I was angry that he had made me feel for 4 seconds a thing I did not want to feel about the woman I'd been married to 32 years. So I got rid of the feeling. That is what a man does. He finds whoever made him feel it and decides the problem is that person. I drove home. Estelle was at the kitchen island with her laptop and a glass of wine and papers spread across the counter, and she looked up and smiled at me the way she had smiled at me since I was 26 years old. "You're late," Remy kept me. "Everything all right on Masonboro?" And I stood in my own kitchen and looked at my wife and said, "Fine. It's fine." I did not ask her. That is the sentence I have had to live with. Not the signatures, not the money. I had one chance on one Tuesday in November to stand in my kitchen and ask my wife a simple question, and she would have had to answer it or lie to my face while I watched her do it. And I chose not to ask because I did not want to know. She closed the laptop. She said, "You look tired." "I'm 67. "You're 66 until March." She came around the island and put her hand flat on my chest right over the pocket where the pen was, and she left it there. "Sit down. I'll heat you something." She heated me chicken and rice and sat across from me while I ate and asked about the poor schedule and remembered the name of the inspector I'd been fighting with. She was warm. She was kind. She was my wife. I have replayed that evening more than any other evening of my life. Not the day she threw me out. That one, because there is no version of that hour where she does not already know. She prepared the waterproofing change order in September. She knew what was under that foundation and what wasn't. And she sat across a table from me and asked about my day. People ask how you don't see it. That's how. It doesn't look like lying. It looks like a woman heating you a plate. 3 weeks later, I took Remy off the Masonboro site. I told myself it was scheduling. Cape Fear needed a foreman, and he was the best I had. That was even true in the way things are true when you need them to be. He knew. He didn't argue. He said, "Whatever you need, boss," took his gear to the other site, and something between us that had been solid 23 years went quiet. That was December. In January, the payments stopped coming early. They came on time. Then they came a week late. Then Lachlan called me himself, friendly as ever, and said there was a delay on his end with the bank on the Southport parcel, and would it be all right if the January draw came through in 2 pieces instead of 1? I said, of course. Then I went to my own bank, because I still had to make payroll on Friday for 31 men. And I borrowed against my receivables for the first time in 9 years. And when I got home that night, my daughter's car was in the driveway. Camille was in the kitchen when I came in. Still in her work clothes, drawings rolled under her arm, like she'd come straight from a job site of her own. 33. My daughter designed buildings instead of building them, which used to be a joke between us, and had stopped being funny sometime that year. Though I couldn't have told you exactly when. "Hey, Dad." "This is a surprise." "I called Mom. She said come by." Camille glanced toward the hallway where I could hear Estelle's voice low on the phone in the office. "How's the crew handling the West Coastal load?" "Good crew. Good load." That's not what I asked. I hung my jacket on its hook by the door and said, "What did you ask?" "I asked how it's going and you gave me a company answer." She set the drawings on the counter. "Dad, I ran into Doug Hensley at a permit meeting last week. He does bonding underwriting for half the contractors on this coast. He asked me if Haynes Commercial was all right." She watched my face. "He said your bond premium went up twice this year. That's not normal for a company your size with your history." I felt my jaw do something I didn't ask it to do. Bond rates move around, Camille. It's not a mystery. Insurance companies raise rates because insurance companies raise rates. Twice in 1 year. "You want to talk about my business or you want to tell me why you actually drove over here?" That landed harder than I meant it to. She had her mother's eyes when she was hurt, quick and then gone still, the same stillness I'd watched Estelle do 100 times. And for one strange second, I thought that my daughter had learned that stillness from somewhere, and it wasn't from me. "I drove over," she said, "because I love you, and because I think something's wrong, and because every time I bring it up, You turn it into me not trusting Mom. Do you trust her? I asked it before I understood I was going to ask it. It came out flat, no heat in it. The way you ask a question you already believe you know the answer to, and just want somebody else to say it so you don't have to. Camille looked at me for a long moment. She's my mother, she said. Of course I trust her. Then what is this? This is me asking you to look at the bond premium. That's the whole thing. She picked her drawings back up, which is a thing she does when a conversation is closing on her, the way I reach for a level when I want to stop arguing about whether a wall is straight. You don't have to do anything tonight. Just look. Estelle came out of the hallway, phone in hand, and her face did the thing it always did, walking into a room where two people had been talking without her. A half second of reading gone almost before it landed. There she is, Estelle said, arms already out. I didn't know you were staying for dinner. I'm not. I've got a site visit at 7. You work too hard. You get that from your father. Estelle kissed her cheek. Everything all right? You look tense. I'm fine, Mom. I watched my daughter say that to her mother's face. The exact same sentence I had said to my wife 3 weeks earlier standing in this same kitchen. Fine. It's fine. And I understood something in that moment. I would not let myself finish understanding for another 5 months. We both lied to the same woman in the same kitchen using the same word. Camille left at 7:40. I walked her out. Standing in the driveway in the cold, she turned back before she got in and said, Dad, I'm not trying to start something with Mom. I just need you to actually look at the number. Promise me you'll look? I'll look. Tonight. Camille. Tonight, Dad. Please. I meant it when I said it the way I had meant 100 things that year I did not do, because meaning and doing had quietly become two separate acts in my life. I went back inside. Estelle was loading the dishwasher. What did she want? Bond premium's up twice this year. Doug Hensley told her. Estelle didn't turn around. She rinsed a plate and set it in the rack. It's up because I switched our surety carrier in the spring. New carrier, new baseline. It'll level out next renewal. You switched carriers. I sent you the memo, Sal. I had a vague memory of papers on my desk in March, signed on a Sunday while watching a ball game with the sound down. I could not have told you what was in that stack. And I understand now that in a sense, my life depended on it. Why switch? Better terms on the aggregate limit given how much volume we're carrying with West Coastal. She closed the dishwasher and started it. I can show you the comparison sheet. It's in the file. I don't need to see it. You should see it. If Camille's going to bring people like Doug Hensley into this, there it was. Quiet, almost gentle, but there. Camille had gone outside the family to ask a question, and Estelle let me know without raising her voice that she did not appreciate it. I didn't ask to see the comparison sheet. I want that, sitting next to the one from 3 weeks before in the trailer when I didn't ask Remy to say more, and the one from that same November night when I didn't ask Estelle directly. 3 chances, 3 nights. I took none of them. It is easier to trust a liar you love than to doubt a stranger you don't. I went to bed. Estelle came in an hour later, smelling like her night cream, and put her hand on my back the way she had for 34 years, and I fell asleep to the sound of her breathing. Downstairs in my own filing cabinet was a comparison sheet that did not exist because there had been no new carrier, because the premium had gone up for a reason that had nothing to do with insurance rates and everything to do with a claims history that was starting very quietly to accumulate against my name. I woke up at 1:40 in the morning, and the other side of the bed was cold. This had started happening in December. I'd wake up and the house would be lit downstairs, just the kitchen, a low gold rectangle spilling into the hallway. I would lie there a minute, then get up because that is what 34 years teaches a man to do when his wife is awake in the middle of the night and he is not. She was at the kitchen island with 3 folders open, and her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and she didn't hear me on the stairs until I was most of the way across the room. Sal. She closed the folder nearest her, not fast, not guilty, just the ordinary motion of a woman putting a document away when company arrives. You should be asleep. So should you. West Coastal's draw request needs to go out by 8. I want the numbers clean before Lachlan's people look at them. I looked at her. 59 in a cardigan she'd had since Camille was in high school, hair coming loose from wherever she'd pinned it 14 hours earlier. And there was something in her face I would have called exhaustion at the time, and that I understand now was something closer to strain. Not overwork, the strain of holding 2 different versions of a set of numbers in her head at once and making certain every single night that only one of them ever reached daylight. "Let me make coffee," I said. "You don't have to do that." "I want to. I made coffee at 1:40 in the morning, more nights than I can count that winter. And I want to describe exactly what that looked like because it is the clearest picture I can give you of how a good man misses what is happening 3 feet in front of him." I ground the beans quiet, though there was no one else in the house to wake. I carried 2 mugs to the island. I set hers to her left because she is left-handed, a fact I have known about my wife for 34 years, the way I know the load rating on a floor joist. Then I sat across from her and did not ask what was in the folders because asking felt like an intrusion into work I did not understand. That night she said thank you, and wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at me over the top of it and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you handling the building and me handling this." "That's the deal," I said. "Always has been. It's a good deal." She smiled tiredly as far as I could tell, and I still don't know, even now, how much of that smile was true and how much was a woman doing arithmetic behind her own eyes while she looked at the man she'd decided to leave. I sat with her 40 minutes. She worked. I drank my coffee and looked at the dark window, thinking about nothing the way you do at 2 in the morning when you are simply keeping someone company because you love them. At some point I noticed the 3rd folder, the one she hadn't closed, had a tab that said Walter Holdings in her own handwriting, block letters, the kind she used for filing labels. I remember reading it. I remember it registering as nothing at all. Walter was her maiden name. Estelle Walter before Estelle Haynes. I knew that the way I knew she was left-handed, an old fact, worn smooth by 34 years of not needing it. If I thought anything at all, it was something like, she's still got old paperwork filed under her family name the way people do. I did not ask what Walter Holdings was. That is the 2nd folder in this story with a name on it that I looked at directly and did not question, and it will not be the last. I tell you each time not to punish myself, but because I want you to understand how this works. It is not cleverness, it is familiarity. A stranger's folder gets opened, a wife's folder gets trusted. At 2:20 I went back to bed. She stayed down past 3. In the morning she was up before me, showered, dressed, folders gone from the island, coffee already made. She kissed the top of my head on her way out and said the draw request had gone out clean, and I believed her because I had watched her work for it, and a man does not easily disbelieve a thing he has watched someone suffer to produce. The bank called on a Wednesday, the 2nd week of February. I was on the Cape Fear site when my phone rang a Wilmington number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail in the middle of walking a punch list with the building inspector, and something made me answer anyway. "Mr. Haynes, this is Denise Farrow, First Coastal Bank. I'm calling about the receivables line. I've got a payment scheduled for the 15th. That's actually why I'm calling." A pause. The particular pause of someone choosing words she'd been told to choose carefully. "We're seeing some activity on the account that our compliance department flagged for review, and I wanted to reach out to you directly rather than just send a letter." "What kind of activity?" "There's a payment history showing the account was drawn against twice more in the last 90 days than what we have record of you authorizing. I have signatures on both draws, but I wanted to confirm with you personally, since the amounts are significant." I stood in the mud with the inspector waiting behind me and a phone against my ear, and I said slowly, "What amounts are we talking about?" "The first draw was for $91,000, dated December 11th. The second was for $67,000, dated January 29th. I had authorized one draw that winter. I knew the number by heart, and it was not either of these 2 numbers, and not on either of these 2 dates. "Ms. Farrow," I said, "I need you to send me copies of those signatures today." The signatures came through on a secure email link at 4 that afternoon. I stood in the cab of my truck in the Cape Fear parking lot and looked at them on my phone screen, zoomed in as far as the image would let me go. They were mine. Or close enough to mine that I could not have told the difference if a stranger had handed them to me cold. But I did not sign them. I know my own hand the way I know the sound of my own truck door, and there is a hitch in the tail of the Y in Haynes that I have made the same way since I was a boy. A little hook back to the left before it finishes, and both of these had it. Both of these had it exactly. I called Estelle from the truck. "The bank called me," I said. "About 2 draws in December and January. 91,000 and 67,000. There was a pause on her end, short the kind of pause a person takes when they are deciding which true thing to tell you. "Those were mine," she said. "I have signing authority on the account, Sal. I've had it since 2009. You signed my name." "I signed as an authorized officer of the company. That's standard. My signature stamp uses the company's signature block, which is your name because you're the principal. It's not forgery, honey. It's how the account is structured. Denise Farrow should have explained that." I sat there a moment. I want to tell you that something in me said this doesn't sound right, because banks call about odd account activity, not about a wife using a signature stamp she's had for 15 years. I want to tell you I caught that. I did not catch it. What I caught instead was relief, because the alternative to believing her was something I did not have room in my chest for that day, standing in a gravel lot, with an inspector's punch list still folded in my jacket pocket. What were the draws for payroll gap in December? West Coastal's payment slipped, remember, and I had to cover Friday. January was materials for Masonboro. I would have told you, but you were dealing with the inspector on the Oleander building, and I didn't want to load you up. Every piece of that was plausible. That is the thing about a good lie inside a 34-year marriage. It does not need to be airtight. It only needs to fit the shape of 100 true things that came before it. "Okay," I said. "Are we okay?" "We're okay." We were not okay. I understand that now, with a clarity that still some mornings takes my breath the way cold water does. But that afternoon in that parking lot, I believed my wife and I drove home, and I did not call Denise Farrow back. And I did not ask to see the signature authorization paperwork that would have shown in about 4 minutes that no such stamp had ever been registered with First Coastal Bank. The Masonboro Capital call came at the end of February. Lachlan called me himself this time, not through an assistant, which I remember thinking was a kindness. He said the Southport parcel had hit an environmental delay, a wetlands reclassification nobody saw coming, and it was going to cost the project $400,000 to resolve before the county would release the next permit phase. He said West Coastal was good for it eventually, insurance and indemnification both in progress, but eventually was not fast enough for the subcontractors standing in line with their hands out. And if Haynes Commercial could bridge 60 days, he'd add 2 points to the contract margin on the back end as a thank you. I did the math that night at my own kitchen table. 60 days. 2 points on a contract that size was real money. "We could do it," Estelle said, "if we free up the equity in the house." I looked at her. "Just a portion," she said. "A home equity line. Not a sale, not a second mortgage, even. Just a line against equity. We're not using for anything. We pay it off the second West Coastal's indemnification clears, which Lachlan says is 60 days. The house on Forest Hills. I had poured that foundation myself in 1991, back when Haynes Commercial was me and one other man and a rented mixer. I had framed the porch the year Camille was born, working nights after the day job, because I wanted my daughter to come home from the hospital to a house with a real porch on it, not a slab and a promise. It's the house, Estelle. It's equity in the house. The house stays ours. This is just using what we've already got instead of leaving it sitting there doing nothing while somebody else makes 2 points on it. She was not wrong on paper. That is the thing I want you to sit with. Every single step of this taken alone was defensible. A change order here, a signature stamp there, a home equity line against a paid-off house to bridge 60 days for a client who had never once been late on a payment until 3 months ago. It is only when you stand far enough back to see all of it at once that the shape becomes something else entirely. and nobody stands far enough back while they are living inside it. I signed the equity line application on a Tuesday in March. Camille called me the following Sunday while I was in the yard, raking the last of the winter leaves out from under the azaleas. "Dad?" she said, and her voice had something in it I hadn't heard from her before. Not anger, something underneath anger. "I need you to sit down before I tell you what I found." I put down the rake and sat on the porch steps, phone against my ear, and told her to go ahead. "I pulled the permit records for Masonboro," Camille said. "For a bid I'm working on, 2 lots over, I needed the site plan on file with the county. And Dad, the structural drawings on record don't match what's built. There's no additional footing depth anywhere in the permitted set. Nothing that would need $41,000 of extra steel." The oleander change order. The first one. The one I had told myself for months was the proof that everything after it was real too. "Camille, that job might have had a field revision that didn't get filed with the county yet. That happens." I checked the inspection sign-offs too, Dad. The structural inspector closed that out in June. Nobody amends a permit 6 months after final inspection unless something's wrong. I sat on those porch steps and felt something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the March air. And then I did the thing I am least proud of in this entire story. "You're an architect, looking at a general contractor's paperwork from a courthouse database," I said. "You don't know how change orders get filed in the field. This isn't your business, Camille." Silence on the line. A long one. "It's not my business," she said finally, very quiet. "That somebody might be stealing from you." "Nobody's stealing from me." "Then explain the steal." "I don't have to explain anything to my own daughter about my own company." I heard her breath catch just slightly, the way it used to when she was small and trying not to cry in front of me, because she'd decided at some point that crying in front of her father was a kind of failure, and I had never once told her that wasn't true, and I understand now that was one more thing I owed her, that I never paid. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad." "Camille, I have to go." She hung up. I sat on the porch steps of a house that no longer entirely belonged to me, holding a phone that had gone quiet. And I told myself my daughter was overreaching, reading county paperwork like it was a courtroom exhibit, looking for a crime because she had never fully warmed to Estelle the way I'd hoped she would. And there was a version of me that believed every word of that story, because believing it cost nothing, and the alternative cost everything. I did not call her back that night. I told myself I'd let her cool off. It was 5 weeks before we spoke again, and by then it was too late to matter. The Masonboro bridge money ran out faster than Lockland's 60 days. In April, he called again, same warm voice, same easy manner, and told me the wetlands indemnification had hit a second delay, some appeal filed by an environmental group. Nobody had budgeted for, and could we hold the line another 45 days? And would I consider, just as a formality, putting the company's surety bond up as additional collateral, so his primary lender would feel comfortable extending their own patience? I want to explain what a surety bond actually is because most people outside this business don't know, and it matters enormously to what happened later. A contractor's bond isn't insurance for the contractor. It's a guarantee to the project owner that if the contractor fails to perform, the bonding company will step in and finish the job or pay damages. It exists entirely to protect other people from me. Pledging it as collateral for anything is not a normal thing a contractor does, because the bond isn't really mine to pledge. It belongs to the arrangement between me, my clients, and the company that stands behind my name. Estelle handled the paperwork with Coastal Surety directly. She told me it was a standard collateral assignment, temporary, tied to the Masonboro delay, and that Gerald Van Treese himself had reviewed it and signed off. I called Gerald Van Treese anyway. I want that on the record too, because it is the one thing I did right that spring, even though I did not do enough with what he told me. "Mr. Haynes." His voice was careful in a way I noticed but did not understand. "I did process a collateral assignment request on your bond, yes." "Is that normal?" A pause longer than Denise Farrow's had been. "It's not something I see often on an account your size. Most contractors your age and standing don't need to leverage bonding capacity for a bridge loan." Another pause. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Haynes. I had some questions when the request came in. Your wife assured me it was temporary and that you were fully aware. I signed it. I know you did. I have the signature. Something in the way he said that last sentence sat with me for days afterward. A particular flatness, like a man choosing to say a true thing and nothing more than the true thing, leaving the rest for me to find on my own if I ever went looking. I asked him one more question before we hung up. Is there anything else I should know, Mr. Vantrease? He was quiet long enough that I almost said his name again. Not that I can tell you today, he said finally. Just keep good records, Mr. Haynes. Whatever else happens, keep good records. It was an odd thing for a bond underwriter to say to a man he'd just approved a collateral assignment for. And I noticed that it was odd, and I did not ask him what he meant by it. I did not go looking. Not yet. 3 days later, the general superintendent on the Masonboro job called to say 2 subcontractors had walked off site because their invoices from January still hadn't cleared. I drove to Masonboro that afternoon and found 4 men standing in the parking lot with their tool bags already in their trucks. Sal. One of them, a plumber named Dwight, I'd used for 11 years, wouldn't quite look at me. Nothing personal. I got a crew to feed. I know. Your office told my office the check was in the mail 3 weeks ago. I know, Dwight. I did not know. That was the truth of it, standing in that parking lot in April, with the smell of cut pine still hanging over the site from that morning's framing crew. And I had to decide in front of a man I'd known for a decade whether to admit that I did not know what my own company owed to its own subcontractors, or to say something that sounded like I did. I said, "Give me till Friday." He gave me till Friday. Most of them did. That is the thing about small men doing honest work for other small men. There is a well of patience there that runs deeper than people who've never swung a hammer for a living tend to understand. And I drew on that well for months, without fully reckoning what I was spending. I called the office that night and asked Estelle for a full accounts payable aging report. Every subcontractor, every invoice, every date. She sent it the next morning. It was clean organized, tabbed by project, and it showed exactly what I expected it to show. Current invoices moving through the pipeline at the normal pace. Nothing alarming. Nothing that would explain 4 men standing in a parking lot with their tools already loaded. I did not know then that the report she sent me and the report her own internal ledger showed were 2 different documents, built from 2 different sets of numbers, and that the second one, the true one, lived on a laptop she kept in a drawer at the office that I had never once opened because why would I? It was her drawer. It had always been her drawer. Remy called me from the other site that week. We hadn't talked much since I'd pulled him off Masonboro in November, and there was a stiffness in his voice at first, the leftover of a wound neither of us had tended. "Heard about the walk-off," he said. "Handled it. You want me to come look at the books?" I want to tell you I said yes. I did not say yes. I said, "I've got it, Remy," in a tone that closed the door on the offer as firmly as I had closed it on him in that trailer 5 months earlier, and he said, "All right, boss," the same 2 words he'd said walking out that day. And I understood, even as I said it, that I was doing the same thing twice to the same man for the same reason. I could not afford that spring to let anyone else see what I was not yet willing to see myself. Alexander Oliver kept the crew moving that month more than anything I did. He ran the hardware supply house on Castle Street, 71 years old, had sold me lumber and fasteners and everything in between since my 2nd year in business. And when my accounts with 2 of my regular suppliers went to credit hold in late April, he kept extending me terms on nothing but 40 years of history and a handshake. "You've paid me every dollar you ever owed me," he said when I came in to apologize for the account being 60 days past due for the first time in our relationship. I imagine that hasn't changed just because the last 2 months have been ugly. I don't know how ugly it's going to get, Alexander. Then we'll find out together. He rang up my order like nothing had been said at all. "Man, your age, your record, this is weather, Sal. Weather passes." I have thought about that sentence more than almost anything else anyone said to me that year. Because he was wrong about it being weather, and right about something else entirely, which was that a man's 40 years of character will sometimes buy him grace that a bank statement never could. The building inspector came to the Masonboro site on the last Thursday in April. I knew Otis Beaumont the way you know a man you've dealt with across 100 inspections over 20 years, professionally, at arm's length, mutual respect, built on him never once looking the other way for me, and me never once asking him to. I had turned down his predecessor's request for a case of bourbon at Christmas in 1998, back when that was still the kind of thing some inspectors expected. And word travels in a business this size, and Otis had come up under a man who told him that story more than once. He walked the framing with his clipboard, quiet there, the same as always, tapping a stud here, checking a header there. The same unhurried pace he'd used on every one of my jobs for 2 decades. But at the end, standing by his truck with his hand already on the door handle, he asked me something that had nothing to do with the framing at all. "Sal, you still doing the waterproofing on your foundations with coastal envelope?" "Far as I know." He looked at me a moment longer than the question needed. "Huh," he said. "You seen their truck out here lately?" "Can't say I have." "Neither have I." He got in his truck, then paused with the door half shut, looking at me over the top of it. "You're a careful man, Sal. Always have been. Just keep your eyes open out here." He pulled away before I could ask him what he meant by it, and I stood there in the mud a long moment, turning the question over. And then I did what I had done with every other odd thing that year. I let it go. Estelle called me at the Cape Fear trailer on the second Tuesday in October and asked me to come home early. "Not urgent," she said, "just important." She had something she needed me to sign before Friday's West Coastal closing, and she wanted to walk me through it properly, instead of catching me tired at the end of a long day. I remember thinking driving home that it was decent of her to ask, instead of just leaving it on the counter like she usually did. She had the kitchen table cleared when I walked in, which she never did, one single folder set square in the middle of it, and 2 glasses of iced tea already poured. Hers untouched, mine sweating. A ring onto the wood. "Sit," she said. I sat. "This is the personal guarantee for the Masonboro extension," she said. "Coastal Surety wants it before they'll release the bond increase Lachlan needs to close Friday. It puts your personal assets behind the company obligation, instead of just the business assets. It's standard for a project this size. I want to tell you I asked good questions. I asked one. What personal assets? The house? The retirement accounts? Standard language, Sal. Every guarantee looks like this." I looked at the folder. 11 lines on the page, same as always. A signature block at the bottom, same as always. I had signed language like this a dozen times over 41 years, on projects a fraction of this size, and it had never once cost me anything. Because the projects had always been real. I took the pen out of my shirt pocket. I want to describe exactly what the kitchen looked like at that moment, because I have gone back to this room in my mind more times than any other room I have ever stood in. The light was going amber the way it does in early October, that slant that comes an hour before dusk. The dish towel on the oven handle was one Camille had given her mother for Christmas 11 years ago, still in rotation. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at nothing. I signed the page. I did not read it. Estelle picked the pen up from where I'd set it down. She turned it over once between her fingers the way she always did, an old habit 34 years deep. And for 1/2 second I thought she was about to say something warm. Something about how far we'd come since that parking deck on Oleander Drive, since the hood of my truck. She pushed the pen back across the table toward me. "Keep it," she said. "You're going to need it. I want you to sit in that sentence with me the way I have had to sit in it for 11 months. Keep it. You're going to need it." I thought in the 1/2 second before everything changed that she meant it kindly. I thought she meant, you have more of these to sign more contracts, more years of building things, and you'll want your pen with you. She did not mean that. "Sal." Her voice had changed, not louder. Lower and flatter, the register she used for closing a negotiation, and I had heard that register 1,000 times across 1,000 tables, and had never once heard it turned on me. "I need you to listen without saying anything until I'm finished." Estelle, without saying anything. I sat back. The dish towel. the dog outside, the pen sitting on the table between us where she'd pushed it. That document you just signed transfers your personal guarantee obligations in a way that also releases my liability on the joint accounts, she said. I've spoken to an attorney. I've filed for divorce this morning. The papers will be served this week. I did not say anything because I could not have said anything if my life had depended on it. My mouth had simply stopped being a thing I knew how to operate. I'm not doing this to hurt you, she said. And I believe even now that she believed that sentence when she said it. I've been unhappy for a long time, Sal. Longer than you'd want to hear, and I've made a decision about my life, and I need you to hear that I've also made arrangements to protect myself financially, which is what any reasonable person does. Arrangements. You'll have time to process this. How much time? She looked at the clock on the stove. 6:14. You have until 10, she said. I'd like you things out of the house by then. I've already had Camille's old room made up for you at the guest cottage on the Sound property temporarily until you find something. The Sound property. A rental we owned outright sat empty most of the year. I remember thinking in the strange, sideways way the mind works when it is trying not to think the real thing that it was almost generous of her to have arranged somewhere for me to sleep. I stood up. My chair scraped the floor loud in a kitchen that had gone entirely silent. 34 years, I said. It was the only sentence I had. I know, she said. And for one moment, one single moment, something moved across her face that looked like it might have cost her something to hold still through. Then it was gone, and she was already reaching for her phone on the counter, already somewhere past me in her mind. I walked out through the garage because it was closer than the front door. My hands not entirely steady, the pen still sitting on that kitchen table where she'd pushed it back to me. And I did not go back for it. And that is where I saw it. Parked at the curb, engine running, headlights off in the dusk, a black Range Rover waiting. I did not go to the Sound property that night. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 11 minutes with the Range Rover idling at the curb, and then I drove to the Cape Fear trailer, because it was mine. Or I still believed it was mine. And I slept 4 hours on the fold-out cot I kept there for early mornings on cold pours. The state suspended my contractor's license on the second Friday of November. I received the notice by certified mail thick enough to mean serious intent. And I sat in the trailer and read it twice before I understood what I was reading. 2 formal complaints had been filed against Haynes Commercial Construction with the State Licensing Board. One from a subcontractor alleging non-payment despite documented completion of work. One from a client alleging structural deficiencies covered up through falsified inspection paperwork. The client was West Coastal Group. I called Lachlan that afternoon. He did not answer. I called again the next day, and an assistant I had never spoken to told me Mr. West was unavailable and would have his attorney reach out regarding contractual matters going forward. I understand now what I did not understand that week. The complaint had not been filed because Lachlan believed I had falsified anything. It had been filed because a state licensing suspension is one of the fastest ways to freeze a contractor's bonding capacity. And freezing that capacity was the last piece Estelle needed to make certain I could not simply rebuild under my own name while the divorce worked through court. Coastal Surety sent formal notice the same week. My bond had been called in full. Gerald Van Treese's letter used the word default, and I sat with that word a long time because I had never, in 41 years, had it applied to anything with my name on it. The letter gave me 90 days. 90 days to satisfy the bond obligation or resolve the licensing complaints, or Coastal Surety would exercise its right of subrogation against every asset the collateral assignment touched, which, by then, I understood with a coldness that felt almost like relief after weeks of confusion, meant nearly everything I had left. 90 days. I want you to hold that number the way I held it, because everything that follows in this story happens inside it. I moved out of the trailer when the state padlocked the Cape Fear gate. Standard procedure, nothing personal. A deputy told me, apologetic, young enough to be my grandson. I slept in my truck 6 nights after that. Behind the Piggly Wiggly the first 2 nights, until a security guard asked me to move along. then behind Oliver's hardware supply on Castle Street, because I had nowhere else. And because some part of me still trusted that gravel lot the way you trust a place you've stood in 1,000 times before. Alexander Oliver found me there on the 7th morning, unlocking a long moment, looking at my truck with the tarp in the bed and the fog on the windshield. And then he came and knocked on the glass. I rolled the window down. "How long?" he said. "Week." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "There's a room above the store. Storage, mostly, but there's a cot up there from when my nephew used to stay over. It's yours, as long as you need it." "Alexander, I can't pay you rent right now." "I didn't ask you for rent." He looked at me the way he'd looked at 100 lumber orders over 40 years steady, unbothered, a man who had decided something and did not need to discuss it further. "Bring your things up whenever you're ready. Doors open." That was the moment I started to come back to myself, though I did not feel it that morning. What I felt was closer to shame, the particular shame of a 68-year-old man being handed a cot by someone else's kindness. It took me weeks to understand that accepting it was not weakness. It was the first sound decision I had made in over a year. I carried 3 boxes up the narrow stairs behind the store that afternoon. Everything I owned fit in 3 boxes. The third was mostly paper. Old contracts, old correspondence, tax records going back a decade, the accumulated sediment of 41 years in a business that ran on documentation. I had grabbed it off my desk in the 10 minutes the deputy gave me before padlocking the gate. Not thinking, just grabbing the way your hands decide what matters faster than your mind can when a house is on fire. That night on the cot under a bare bulb, I went through it piece by piece because I had nothing else to do and nowhere else to be. Near the bottom of the box was a folder I did not remember putting there. Manila, unlabeled, on the tab, thin, maybe 6 or 7 pages inside. I almost set it aside without opening it. I opened it. It was a partial printout from the company's shared drive, something Estelle must have run off months earlier for a meeting and left in a stack near my desk, without either of us thinking twice about it. The kind of stray document that ends up in the wrong pile in any busy office. A vendor payment summary, 3 lines highlighted in yellow. Consulting services, Walter Holdings, LLC, $42,000. I sat on that cot for a long time with the bare bulb humming overhead. And I thought about a tab in her handwriting on a folder at 2 in the morning, months before any of this. And a wife who was left-handed, and a maiden name I had known for 34 years the way I knew the load rating on a floor joist. I did not think that night of an affair. I thought, that is not old paperwork. That is a company. Day 82. I want to explain the counting because I did it every single morning for 3 months out loud, sometimes alone, in that room above Oliver's hardware supply, the way another man might say a prayer. 90 days from the coastal surety notice. 82 left the morning I fixed Mrs. Halloway's porch railing. For $240 cash. The first money I had earned with my own hands in 11 months that didn't come from a company that no longer existed. She lived 3 doors down, widowed, 79. And had mentioned to Alexander her railing had come loose, and she was afraid to use her steps. I walked over with a bag of lag bolts bought with my own cash and fixed it in 40 minutes. She tried to give me $60. I told her the going rate for a railing was $240 because a man's price is one of the last things he gets to keep when everything else is gone. I remember standing on her porch afterward, testing the rail with both hands, feeling it hold solid under my full weight. And something moved in my chest I had not felt since October. It was such a small thing, but it was mine, done with my hands for a fair price, and nobody had lied to get it, and nobody had lied to get out of paying for it. Word travels fast in a town this size when a man like me is suddenly available, and suddenly humble about the price. Remy found me on the 11th day. He didn't call first. He drove his truck into the gravel lot behind Oliver's on a Saturday morning and got out and stood there looking up at the window of the room I was staying in until I came down. "Heard you were doing handyman work," he said. "That's the going business model right now. I've got 2 weeks between jobs. Foreman work for a framing outfit out of Leland, but they don't need me till the 15th. He looked at me steady, the way he'd looked at 100 out-of-plumb walls. I figured you could use a second set of hands, more than they could use mine. Remy. I did not have a sentence ready for this. I can't pay you what you're worth. Didn't ask what I was worth. Asked if you needed hands. I need to tell you something about the 5 months before that morning. The ones where I had pulled him off Masonboro, shut the door on him twice, chosen my wife's paperwork over his 23 years of reading concrete and steel. I have never once heard him bring it up. Not that day, not since. He simply drove into that lot and offered his hands to a man who had twice told him his instincts didn't matter. And I understood, watching him stand there with his cap in his hand, exactly as he had in that trailer a year earlier, that some men measure loyalty by what they say, and others by what they show up for. Zayden Myers showed up the following week. 26 years old, I'd trained him myself, starting at 19, and he'd left Haynes Commercial 2 years back for better money, with a bigger outfit in Southport, and I hadn't blamed him for it then, and didn't blame him now. Heard what happened, he said, standing in the same gravel lot. Heard some of it wrong too, probably. Don't much care which parts. You taught me how to read a level before I could legally drink. I'm in if you'll have me. 3 men and a truck. That was the whole of Haynes Commercial Construction by the second week of the new year, working out of a room above a hardware store, taking on porch repairs, and the kind of small tenant improvement work nobody else wanted. It was Remy on our 3rd job together who asked to see the paperwork. We were framing a partition wall in a strip mall unit on Oleander, a job worth maybe $1,100, small enough that it embarrassed me every time I thought about the buildings I used to run. Remy was cutting studs and said without looking up, "You still got the Masonboro files? The original ones?" "Some of them. What's left?" "I want to see the Oleander Medical Building change order, the steel one. The first one." "Why that one?" He set the saw down and looked at me. "Because it's the only one I actually watched go in the ground, Sal. I checked the delivery ticket myself back when I still had access to check anything. If that one's real, it tells us something about how they built the lie. If even that one's not real, it tells us something worse." I drove to the storage unit that evening, the one place my 3 boxes of paperwork lived now, and found the Oleander change order in a folder that still smelled faintly of the trailer it came from. $41,000. Additional structural steel northeast corner. I laid it next to the county's final structural inspection report, which Camille had emailed me 2 nights earlier, without a word of preamble, just the file and a subject line that said, "You'll want this." And I put the 2 documents side by side, under the bare bulb in that room above Oliver's, and I read them both, twice. The inspection report listed the exact steel tonnage installed at final sign-off. It matched the original permitted drawings exactly. There was no additional steel in that building. There had never been any additional steel in that building. The very first change order, the one that had taught me to trust every one that came after it, the one I had held up in my own mind for a year as proof the fraud started later than it actually did, was itself the first lie. I sat with that for a long time before I said a word to Remy. Lydia Burns kept an office above a dry cleaner on Front Street. 2 rooms and a paralegal who worked 3 days a week, and I found her name the way I found most things that winter. By asking Alexander Oliver who he'd use if a supplier ever cheated him on a contract and could not be reasoned with. "She used to work the insurance side," he said. "Construction fraud mostly. Defense work for the bonding companies. Went out on her own a few years back, doesn't lose much." I called her on day 79. She saw me on day 77, in an office with a single window looking out over a parking lot, stacks of bankers' boxes lining one wall, a woman somewhere in her 40s who looked at me the way Otis Beaumont had looked at a stud wall. Quick, thorough, already forming conclusions before I'd finished a sentence. I laid it all out for her. The waterproofing change order Remy had flagged the year before, the bank draws with signatures that weren't mine, the bond collateral assignment, and now the steel, the first one. The one I had believed longer than any of the others. She listened without writing anything down until I got to the steel. "Show me that one again," she said. I slid the 2 pages across her desk, the change order and the inspection report, the same way I'd laid them out on that cot under a bare bulb 3 weeks earlier. She read them both twice the way I had. Then she set them down and looked at me, and something in her face made my stomach drop before she said a single word. Mr. Haynes, I want to be straight with you because I think you've had enough people not be straight with you this year. Go ahead. This is compelling. It's not enough. It's not enough. I heard my own voice come out flatter than I meant it to. The steal doesn't exist. The paperwork says it does. What more do you need? I need to prove someone besides you knew that when the document was signed. She tapped the signature block at the bottom of the change order. This is your signature, Mr. Haynes. Authentic, not disputed. You authorized this payment yourself in writing, with no evidence of duress at the time. A civil fraud claim requires me to show intent to deceive at the moment the document was executed. Right now, what I have is one contractor who signed a change order for work that on later review appears not to have been performed. That's a breach of contract dispute at best. Judges see contractors get billed for phantom work all the time, and they see contractors who simply didn't read what they signed even more often. I can't get a court to call that fraud on one document. There are others. The waterproofing, the bank draws. The bank draws have a different signatory, using a claimed authority. That's a real problem, and it's the strongest thing you've shown me, but your wife's attorney will argue standard corporate signing practice until you can prove otherwise. And right now you can't because First Coastal never actually registered a signature stamp for her, which means it's her word against a blank space in a file. And blank spaces don't win cases by themselves either. What about the waterproofing? My foreman confirmed nobody ever showed up to do that work. Your foreman's word against a paid invoice from a licensed subcontractor. It helps. It's not enough on its own, and I don't say that to discourage you, Mr. Haynes. I say it because I need you to understand the size of what we're building before you spend 3 more weeks thinking one good document is going to end this. I sat there in that chair and felt the floor of the last 3 weeks tilt underneath me. I thought I had something, I said. You have the beginning of something. She leaned forward. Mr. Haynes, I've spent 15 years on the other side of cases exactly like this one, defending bonding companies against contractors who swore up and down they've been cheated, and I can tell you the ones that win are never built on one smoking document. They're built on a pattern so complete that no other explanation fits. You don't have a pattern yet, you have a suspicion with excellent instincts behind it. Then tell me what a pattern looks like. It looks like proving what isn't there instead of what is. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot for a moment before she turned back. Anybody can forge a change order. What's much harder to fake is the absence of a thing. Materials that were never delivered. Subcontractors who were never on site. Money that moved to a company with no employees and no other clients. That's not a signature dispute. That's a paper trail with a hole in the middle of it, and holes are much harder to argue away than signatures are. I drove back to Oliver's that evening with the windows down, despite the cold, because I needed the air, because something Lydia Burns had said kept turning over in me the whole way back. Anybody can forge a document. It is much harder to fake the absence of a thing. I had spent 41 years building buildings. I knew better than any lawyer standing in an office above a dry cleaner ever could exactly what it looked like when something that was supposed to be in the ground was not. I stood in my room above the hardware store that night and said it out loud to the empty walls the way I'd been counting days out loud for weeks. I have to prove what isn't there. Day 68. The Oleander Medical Building was finished and occupied by then, a walk-in clinic on the ground floor and a physical therapy practice on the second. Patients coming and going all day behind glass doors that used to have my name on the permit posted beside them. You cannot core drill a foundation with patients walking over it at 9 in the morning. You do it at night with the building empty, and you do it quietly, and you do it with equipment that used to belong to your own company, and now technically belonged to whatever remained of a bankruptcy estate nobody had finished sorting out. Remy borrowed the coring rig from a friend who ran a concrete testing outfit out of Leland. A small, trailer-mounted unit meant for exactly this kind of work. Extracting a cylindrical sample from a slab or a footing to check what was actually inside it. We drove out to the medical building at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in January. parked 2 streets over so the truck wouldn't sit conspicuous in the lot, and walked the equipment in on a handcart. The specific location mattered. The northeast corner. The one place on the entire building where $41,000 of additional structural steel was supposed to exist, and according to the county's own final inspection, never had. If Remy's right about the delivery ticket, I said more to myself than to him. There's nothing under this slab but what was always supposed to be there. Standard reinforcement, no supplemental beam. And if there's nothing extra, Remy said, setting the rig, that's not a signature dispute anymore. It took 40 minutes to drill the first core, the motor loud enough in the empty parking lot that I kept looking over my shoulder at the dark windows of the building, half expecting a light to come on somewhere. A security guard, a passerby with a phone already dialing. Nothing did. Remy worked the rig with the same steady hands he'd used checking rebar counts a year earlier. Quiet, methodical, stopping twice to listen for anything moving in the dark before starting the motor again. We pulled a clean cylinder of concrete and rebar up out of the ground, 4 inches across, 18 inches long, and Remy held his headlamp on it while I turned it slowly in my hands. Standard rebar grid. No supplemental steel beam anywhere in the cross-section. Exactly what the original permitted drawings called for, exactly what the county's inspection report said was there, and nothing whatsoever resembling $41,000 of additional structural steel. I want to tell you what that felt like. Holding actual physical proof in my 2 hands after 4 months of paper and signatures and other people's words. It felt like the first solid ground I'd stood on since October. We were labeling the sample, sealing it in a case Remy had borrowed along with the rig when headlights swept across the lot. I froze. Remy killed his headlamp. The truck that pulled in was a county vehicle, white with municipal plates, and I recognized it before the driver's door even opened because I had seen that particular truck parked outside 100 job sites of mine over 20 years. Otis Beaumont got out slow, a flashlight in his hand that he did not turn on, and walked toward us across the dark lot with the unhurried gait of a man who was in absolutely no rush to see clearly what he already suspected he was looking at. "Evening, Sal." Otis. He looked at the coring rig. He looked at the case in Remy's hands. He looked at the raw hole in the parking lot pavement, 4 inches across, that somebody was going to have to explain to a property manager eventually. Nobody said anything for a long moment. I could hear my own pulse, and somewhere off toward the highway, a dog barking at nothing. The same sound, I realized, that had been in the air the night Estelle handed me back that pen. "You know," Otis said, finally looking up at the dark building rather than at either of us. "I drove past here about an hour ago, on my way home from my daughter's place. Noticed the lot lights were out on the northeast corner. County's had a maintenance ticket open on that fixture for 2 weeks now. Somebody really ought to fix that." "Somebody ought to," I said. "Man could do just about anything out here at night with that fixture dark. Nobody'd see a thing." He turned his flashlight over once in his hand without switching it on. "I'll put in another call about that ticket tomorrow." He walked back to his truck. At the door, he paused and looked back at us just once. "Whatever you found here tonight, Sal, I hope it's what you needed." He got in and pulled away, taillights shrinking down Oleander Drive, and neither Remy nor I said a word until they were gone entirely. "He knew exactly what we were doing," Remy said. "He did, and he's going to write that maintenance ticket up tomorrow like it actually explains why nobody saw us." "He is." We packed the rig back onto the handcart and walked it the 2 streets back to where we'd left the truck. Moving quicker now, the adrenaline of the last 10 minutes still working through both of us. And I held that sample case against my chest the whole way, like it was something that could break. When we reached the truck, the passenger window was shattered glass scattered across the seat and the floorboard, glittering under the one working streetlight on the block. The case was gone. Remy wanted to call the police right there in the parking lot. I stopped him. "Think about what we tell them," I said. "That we were core drilling a commercial foundation at midnight without the property owner's permission, and somebody stole the sample we illegally extracted." He stood there with broken glass crunching under his boots and didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't one. We filed a report anyway 2 days later, framed carefully around a broken window and a missing tool case, nothing about what had been inside it, and the officer who took it down clearly understood he was being handed half a story, and clearly did not care enough about a smashed truck window to push for the other half. I called Lydia Burns the next morning and told her what happened. She was quiet on the phone longer than I expected. "Walk me through exactly what happened, step by step," she said. "Don't leave anything out, even the parts that seem small." I walked her through it. The rig, the core, the case, Otis Beaumont's truck pulling in, the two of us packing up and moving fast down the block, the broken window. "Who knew you were doing this?" she asked. "Before you did it." "Remy. Me. That's it. Nobody else. Not Zayden. Not anyone at the hardware store. Nobody else." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Haynes, I need to tell you something. And I need you to hear the whole thing before you react to any of it, because I know how this is going to land." "Go ahead." "Even if that sample walked back into my office tomorrow morning, in the same case with a bow on it, we couldn't use it." I sat down on the edge of the cot because I could feel that this was going to be one of those sentences I would need to be sitting for. "Explain that to me." "Physical evidence in a fraud case needs an unbroken chain of custody. Who collected it, when, how it was stored, who had access at every point before it reaches court. The moment that case sat in an unattended truck with a broken window for even 10 minutes, any competent opposing counsel destroys it in about 90 seconds. They don't need to prove the sample was tampered with. They only need to show it could have been, and a jury never hears about it, or hears it and is told to disregard it, which amounts to the same thing. So it doesn't matter that we found nothing. It matters enormously to you, to me, to what we know is true. It matters not at all to a court, because a court doesn't deal in what we know. It deals in what can be proven through a process nobody can pick apart." She let that sit a moment. "I should have told you this before you drove out there. That's on me as much as anyone. I got excited about the theory and didn't walk you through the mechanics clearly enough." I did not say anything for a while. Outside the window of the room above Oliver's, a delivery truck was backing in, with that steady beeping sound, ordinary Tuesday morning noise. And I remember thinking how strange it was that the world kept making that sound while something in my chest was quietly collapsing again. "We can do it again," I said finally. "Properly this time. With Otis there, officially, chain of custody documented from the first minute." "You can. I'd want you to use an independent testing lab this time, not a favor from Remy's friend. And I'd want law enforcement or a licensed inspector present at collection, so there's no argument about tampering. Otis Beaumont was already there, unofficially. That doesn't help us unless he's willing to say so, under his own authority. On the record, which puts his own job at risk for having let 2 men core drill a building at midnight without a permit." I understood, sitting on that cot with the delivery truck still beeping outside, that I had gotten this exactly backward. I had treated the sample like the prize. It was never the prize. The prize was the process. And I had skipped the process because I was desperate and impatient and had not run an investigation in 30 years. Only buildings. And buildings do not require chain of custody. They only require that they stand. There was one more thing sitting underneath all of it that I could not put down that morning, and it was this. Only 2 people had known Remy and I were going to that site that night. And whoever broke that window had known exactly which case to take out of a truck bed, full of tools worth considerably more than one sealed concrete sample, and had taken nothing else. Somebody had known where we would be. And somebody had known exactly what mattered. I did not let myself finish that thought all the way that morning. There were only 2 names it could point to, and one of them was a man who had driven into a gravel lot on a Saturday and offered me his hands without asking for $1 in return, and I was not ready to let a broken truck window put his name anywhere near a sentence like that. But I thought about it on the drive home. I thought about how Remy had known exactly which change order to ask for first. How he had known exactly where the county's maintenance ticket sat unresolved, if that detail from Otis had even been coincidence at all. And I hated myself a little for thinking it the same way I had hated myself for the 4 seconds of doubt about Estelle in that trailer over a year earlier. Because doubting the people who show up for you costs something every single time, whether the doubt turns out to be right or wrong. I parked outside Oliver's and sat in the truck a long while before I went upstairs, turning it all over. And I did not reach an answer that day. I only reached a question. And the question sat in my chest for the next several weeks, like a stone I could not quite set down. Day 51. Lydia Burns brought Lexi Salas into it the week after the truck window. And I understood within 10 minutes of meeting her why Lydia trusted her with the numbers side of a case the way she trusted no one else. 38-year-old forensic accountant spent 9 years with a regional bank's fraud investigation unit before going independent. She set up at a folding table in the corner of Lydia's office with 2 monitors and a stack of the documents I'd been collecting for months, and she worked the way Remy worked a stud wall. Quick eyes, no wasted motion, already seeing patterns in the first 10 minutes that had taken me a year to notice. One at a time. "I don't need you to explain the construction side to me," she said the first morning, sliding my folders into 3 separate stacks without asking which papers belonged where. "I need you to let me follow the money the way you'd follow a load path through a building. Every dollar goes somewhere for a reason. My job is finding the reason." I liked her immediately, the same way I had liked Otis Beaumont for 20 years. A professional who trusted her own eyes and did not need me to hold her hand through the parts she already understood better than I did. "Walter Holdings, LLC, she said on her second day, not looking up from her screen. "Registered with the North Carolina Secretary of State 4 years ago. Registered agent is a P.O. Box service in Wilmington. Managing member listed as E. Walter. That's my wife's maiden name. I assumed as much." She turned the monitor toward me. "Here's what's interesting. 4 years ago is before West Coastal Group was ever on your books. Before the Cape Fear Landing project even. This entity existed before any relationship with Lachlan West that you're aware of." I sat with that a moment. 4 years. Long before a black Range Rover ever pulled into a job site in April. How much moved through it? That's what I've spent the last 3 days finding out. She pulled up a spreadsheet of rows of dates and figures going back further than I'd expected. Small amounts at first, a few thousand here and there described as consulting fees. Then it accelerates. By the time West Coastal shows up in your records, Walter Holdings is receiving regular payments described as project management services, marketing coordination, gala planning for a nonprofit board your wife apparently sat on. It's a business that does a little bit of everything, and as far as I can find, employs exactly one person. Estelle. Lexi scrolled further. "Here's the number that matters to you specifically. Since the West Coastal relationship began, $312,000 moved from various sources connected to your company or to West Coastal Group into Walter Holdings' operating account. $312,000. I had spent months chasing $41,000 here, $63,000 there, feeling like each discovery was a mountain. Sitting in that chair, I understood for the first time that I had been looking at individual trees in a forest somebody had planted very deliberately over years, not months. "I want to trace where it went after that," I said. "Not where it came from. Where it ended up." So did I. Lexi's face did something then that I would come to recognize over the following weeks as her particular expression for delivering news she did not enjoy delivering. Walter Holdings, LLC, was administratively dissolved 11 weeks ago. Filed the paperwork herself according to the Secretary of State's office. Final distribution of assets according to the dissolution filing went to a single beneficiary account. Whose account? An entity called Coral Bay Advisory Limited. She turned the screen fully toward me. Registered in Georgetown, Cayman Islands. I looked at those words on the screen for a long time. She moved it out of the country. She moved it somewhere I cannot subpoena, Mr. Haynes. Not without international legal assistance. That would take months and money you don't currently have. And even then, Cayman entities are built specifically to make exactly this kind of tracing difficult. I can see the wire left Walter Holdings. I can see it arrived at Coral Bay. I cannot right now see past that wall, and I want to be honest with you about how high that wall is before you start planning around getting past it. I sat in that chair in Lydia Burns' office with a folding table and 2 monitors and $312,000 of proof that had just walked itself somewhere I could not follow, and I felt something I had not expected to feel at that particular moment. Not defeat, something closer to recognition. Because I understood, looking at those 2 words, Coral Bay, that I was not looking at a woman panicking to cover her tracks after getting caught. I was looking at a plan that had been executed on schedule. "Lexi," I said, "when did she file that dissolution paperwork? The exact date?" She checked. March 14th. March 14th. 4 days before the state suspended my license, a week before Coastal Surety called my bond. She had closed the company and moved the money before the trap had even finished springing on me. I drove back to Oliver's that night with the window Remy had never quite gotten around to fixing, still letting in a thin whistle of cold air. And I thought about a woman I had been married to for 34 years, sitting down calmly, methodically, on a specific date in March, and filing paperwork to close a door behind her before she had even opened the one in front of me. That was not panic. Panic does not file forms in triplicate 4 days ahead of schedule. That was a woman who had built a calendar and had been checking it off the entire time I thought we were simply having a hard year. Remy didn't show up on a Thursday, which was unusual enough by itself. Because in 24 years working alongside that man, I could count on one hand the mornings he'd been late, let alone absent without a word. I called him. It went to voicemail. I texted him. Nothing came back. Zayden and I finished the tenant improvement job we had going without him, a slower day than it should have been, both of us working around the hole where Remy's steadiness usually sat. And I told myself something had come up. A sick grandchild, a truck that wouldn't start, the ordinary friction of an ordinary life. He didn't show Friday either. By Saturday, I had called 4 times and left 3 messages, and the 4th time the voicemail box was full and wouldn't take any more. And I sat in my room above Oliver's that night, with the stone I had been carrying since the truck window, finally fully settling into my chest. Only 2 people had known about the core drilling that night. I did not want to think it. I want you to understand that I fought against thinking it for 3 straight days, the way you fight against looking at a headline you already know is going to say something you cannot unlearn once you've read it. On Sunday afternoon, I drove out towards Southport on an errand that had nothing to do with any of this, picking up a used compressor a man was selling cheap on a farm road out past the county line, and the most direct route took me past the West Coastal Group construction yard on Carolina Beach Road, a fenced lot where Lachlan kept his equipment and his site trailers between projects. I almost didn't look. I had driven past that yard 100 times over the years without giving it more than a glance. I looked. Remy's truck was parked inside the fence. I want to describe it exactly because I have gone over every detail of that image more times than I can count since. Not near the fence, not visiting, not parked on the street outside, like a man stopping by briefly. Inside the gate. Parked in a row alongside 3 West Coastal Company trucks, in a spot that suggested it had been there a while. The kind of spot a man parks in when he intends to be somewhere for a full day's work. Not a quick errand. I pulled over on the shoulder of Carolina Beach Road and sat there with the engine running, looking at that fenced lot, and I felt something in my chest that I had not felt since the night in the kitchen with the pen and the amber light and the clock reading 6:14. A gate attendant in a small booth near the entrance glanced at my truck idling on the shoulder and then went back to his phone, uninterested, the way men in booths are uninterested in most things that don't require them to lift a barrier arm. I sat there long enough that he looked over twice more before I finally pulled back onto the road, and I drove another 1/4 mile before I had to stop again at a gas station, hands not quite steady on the wheel, and sit there another 10 minutes before I trusted myself to drive the rest of the way home. 24 years. His daughter's wedding. My mother's hospital room. The gravel lot outside Oliver's where he'd stood with his cap in his hands, offering me his labor, when he had every reason in the world to walk away and take an easier job with better pay. I thought about the truck window. I thought about how only Remy and I had known where we would be that night, and how the thief had taken exactly the one thing that mattered and nothing else. And how a man who worked construction sites for a living, who understood exactly what mattered on a job and what didn't, would be precisely the kind of person who could tell a thief which case to grab in the dark. I did not confront him. Not that day. I drove home to the room above Oliver's, and I sat with it the way I had sat with Camille's warning about the bond premium, the way I had sat with Otis Beaumont's question about the waterproofing truck, the way I had sat with every warning anyone had ever tried to hand me for the better part of 2 years. And I understood with a bitterness that surprised me by how deep it ran that I was doing it again. Except this time it did not feel like trust. This time it felt like the ground had genuinely, finally given way beneath the one place I thought I still had solid footing. Zayden called that evening worried, asking if I'd heard from Remy. I told him no. I did not tell him what I'd seen on Carolina Beach Road, because saying it out loud to another person felt like it would make it permanent in a way that simply carrying it silently did not. I lay on that cot a long time that night without sleeping, looking at the bare bulb overhead, running through 24 years of a man's character against one image, of a truck parked inside a fence. And I could not make the two things sit together. And I could not make myself stop believing what I had seen with my own eyes either. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from losing a company, a house, a marriage, all in the space of a year. I had thought by that point that I understood every version of it there was. I did not know yet that the worst one was still coming, and that it would not be about money at all. Day 39. Camille found me the way Remy had, driving into the gravel lot behind Oliver's on a Tuesday evening. Except she did not get out and wait for me to come down. She came straight up the outside stairs and knocked on the door of the room I'd been living in for 4 months. And when I opened it, she stood there in the doorway with her arms crossed and her eyes already wet, and she said, "I should have come sooner." "You don't owe me sooner." "I do." She stepped inside, looked around at the cot and the bare bulb and the 3 boxes that still hadn't fully been unpacked because unpacking them felt like admitting how permanent the room had become, and something in her face cracked. "Dad, I sent you an inspection report and disappeared. I told myself I was giving you space. I wasn't. I was hurt, and I let being hurt keep me away from you for 4 months while you were living like this." I sat down on the edge of the cot because my legs didn't feel entirely steady, and I said, "I told you it wasn't your business. Your own father said that to you. You did. I was wrong. I have had a great deal of time to sit with exactly how wrong, and I want to say it to your face instead of leaving it as something we both just know and never speak." She sat down next to me. For a while, neither of us said anything, and it was the kind of silence that doesn't need filling, the kind 2 people who love each other can sit inside without it becoming uncomfortable. And I had missed that particular silence more than I had let myself admit. "I've been doing some work," she said finally, "since the inspection report. Quiet work. I didn't want to tell you until I had something solid, because I didn't want to hand you another half-finished thread to chase." "What kind of work?" "I still have friends at some of the firms Mom's old nonprofit board worked with. The gala committee, the scholarship dinners, all of it." She looked at her hands. "Dad, I need to ask you something first, and I need you to actually answer it instead of protecting her the way you have this whole time." "Ask it. Do you understand why she left you when she did? Not the money, not the guarantee. Why that specific week?" I sat there a long moment. I thought about the pen. "Keep it, you're going to need it." I thought about the clock reading 6:14 and the 4 hours, and I thought, for the first time, letting myself actually think it all the way through instead of catching the edge of it and turning away about a black Range Rover parked at the curb, with its headlights off and its engine running in the dusk. "Lachlan," I said. It was the first time I had said his name in that sentence out loud in 4 months. Camille's face did something complicated, relief and grief arriving at the same moment. "You knew." "I saw his car. That night. Waiting outside." My voice came out strange to my own ears, flat the way it goes when you are describing something you have spent months refusing to look at directly. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. I told myself a great many things that night, Camille. Because the alternative was more than I had room for, on top of everything else I was losing. "It's been going on almost 2 years, she said gently, the way you deliver something you know is going to hurt, regardless of how carefully you carry it. One of my old contacts saw them together at a hotel in Wilmington 18 months ago and didn't think much of it at the time. A business dinner, nothing unusual for a client relationship. It's only in the last few months, putting things together after everything happened to you, that she realized what she'd actually seen. 18 months. Before the truck breakdown. Before the trailer conversation with Remy. Before the change orders, even if the timing held the way I suspected it did once I let myself do the arithmetic. I sat on that cot in the room above Oliver's hardware supply and understood all at once and completely that I had spent an entire year investigating a financial crime, while somehow never once forcing myself to name the thing sitting directly underneath it. I had chased paperwork, because paperwork could be organized into folders and pattern and proof. A marriage cannot be organized that way. A marriage simply ends or doesn't end. And mine had ended a long time before that October evening in the kitchen. And I had been the last person in my own life to be told. "I'm sorry, Dad," Camille said and put her hand on my shoulder, the way I had once put mine on hers in a car on a road a long time ago, when she was small enough to still believe her father could fix anything. I did not cry. I want that on the record, not out of pride, but because I had done all my crying already, in pieces over 4 months, without ever letting myself understand what each piece was for. 34 years, I said, and I'm the only one in this family who didn't know. We sat a while longer after that, not saying much, the way families do after the worst sentence in a conversation has already been spoken, and there is nothing left to do but let the room absorb it. I asked about her work. She asked if I was eating enough, which made me laugh for the first time in what felt like weeks, because it was such an ordinary daughter's question to ask in the middle of everything else. Her phone rang in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and her face changed. "It's Mom," she said. Camille didn't answer the call in front of me. She let it go to voicemail, sat with the phone face down on her knee for a moment, and said she'd call her mother back later. And I told myself that was nothing, a daughter managing a difficult parent the way daughters do. And I let it go. She called me 4 days later, not the other way around, which I noticed and did not say anything about. "Dad, I need to tell you something before you hear it from somebody else." I was standing in the strip mall unit on Oleander, the same job Remy and I had been framing when this whole second half of the story started. And I stepped outside into the parking lot, because something in her voice told me I would want to be alone for whatever came next. "Go ahead." "Mom's starting a new firm. Design, build residential and light commercial, funded by some investors out of Raleigh she apparently met through the gala circuit. She's asked me to come on as the principal architect." I stood in that parking lot a long moment with the phone against my ear and the February wind cutting through my jacket. And I did not say anything, because I did not trust what would come out if I opened my mouth too fast. "Camille, I know how this sounds. Does he know? Does who know what Lachlan West? Is he one of the investors?" A pause on her end, longer than I wanted it to be. "I don't know all the investor names yet. It's early. Dad, I need work. My last 2 contracts fell through, and I have a mortgage, and whatever Mom's done to you, she's still building something real, and I'm an architect who needs a portfolio, not a moral position." "You told me 11 days ago that you were the only person in this family who'd stayed honest with me. I am being honest with you. I'm telling you before I sign anything instead of letting you find out from somebody in town. You're telling me you're going to work for her. I'm telling you I have to eat, Dad." I understand now, with a distance I did not have that afternoon, that there was a version of that conversation where I asked one more question the way I had failed to ask one more question of Remy in a trailer over a year earlier, of Estelle across a kitchen island of Camille herself, the first time she'd warned me about a bond premium I hadn't wanted to look at. I understand now that I could have asked her why, if she needed work so badly, she hadn't called me first, hadn't asked whether Haynes Commercial, small as it had become, might have a place for a daughter with a design degree and nowhere else to turn. I did not ask that question. I did something else instead. "Do what you need to do," I said, and my voice came out colder than I meant it to, though I am not certain even now that I would take the tone back if I could. "I've got a job finish." "Dad, please don't." I hung up. I stood in that parking lot for a long time afterward, watching a delivery truck idle at the light on Oleander Drive and I thought about 11 days. 11 days since she'd sat on my cot and told me the truth about a man's name I had been too afraid to say myself. 11 days since I had believed for the first time in over a year that at least one person in my family had never stopped being exactly who I thought she was. I went back inside and told Zayden I needed the afternoon, and he didn't ask why, and I drove back to Oliver's and sat on that cot and did something I am not proud of, though I want to tell you about it honestly, rather than smooth it over the way I have smoothed over so much else in this story. I opened my phone and deleted Camille's number. Not blocked. Deleted the way you delete a subcontractor who has burned you twice. A clean erasure meant to signal to some part of myself that I was done extending trust to people who took it and walked it straight back into the enemy's camp. I sat there afterward, looking at the empty space where her name used to be in my contacts, feeling something that I told myself was strength and understand now was simply grief wearing a harder face. I did not tell Zayden what I had done. I did not tell Alexander either, though I suspect he guessed something had happened from how little I said over dinner that evening, standing at his kitchen counter, eating a sandwich in silence, while he watched me with the same patient, unhurried attention he gave a lumber order that didn't add up. Remy still hadn't surfaced. Camille had gone by every appearance to build something new alongside the woman who had built the thing that destroyed me. I had Zayden. I had Alexander Oliver. I had a lawyer with a folding table and a forensic accountant staring at a wall in the Cayman Islands she could not see past. And I had, sitting quietly at the bottom of 3 cardboard boxes, a folder with a name on it that I still had not fully finished understanding. That night I called Lydia Burns and told her I was ready to move faster, whatever that meant, whatever it cost, because I had run out of patience for waiting on people to prove themselves, one slow month at a time. Faster costs more, she said. I don't have money. No, she said, but you might have something better. You might finally be angry enough to be useful. Day 24. Lydia filed the civil complaint on a Monday morning fraud breach of fiduciary duty conversion, 6 causes of action against Estelle Haynes Lachlan, West Coastal Group, and the dissolved shell of Walter Holdings LLC for good measure, even though we both knew that last name was mostly symbolic. A flag planted on ground we couldn't yet defend. I felt something that week I had not felt in over a year. Not hope exactly. Momentum. I remember standing in the parking lot outside Lydia's office the morning the complaint went out, watching a process server load a folder of copies into his car, and thinking for the first time since October that I was no longer only the man these things happened to. I was finally the man making something happen back. We served Lachlan personally on a Wednesday, a process server catching him coming out of a permit meeting downtown, and Lydia told me later that witnesses said his face went through 3 distinct colors in about 4 seconds. I let myself enjoy that image more than I probably should have. I did not enjoy what came 6 days later. A man named Dale Ferris called me on a Tuesday afternoon, identified himself as an investigator with the State Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit, and asked if I would be willing to come in for a voluntary interview regarding, in his words, irregularities in Haynes Commercial Construction's handling of client trust funds prior to its licensing suspension. I stood in the strip mall unit with my phone against my ear and felt the floor tilt the way it had in Lydia's office the day she told me my one good document wasn't enough. Client trust funds, I said. I don't have client trust accounts, Mr. Ferris. I'm a general contractor, not an attorney. There's a complaint on file alleging you diverted advance payments from West Coastal Group into personal accounts rather than applying them to project costs going back approximately 2 years. The complainant has provided documentation. I'm required to follow up on it regardless of my own initial impressions, Mr. Haynes and I. I'd rather hear your side directly than build a file only from theirs. I called Lydia the moment I hung up. He's done it, she said, after I'd walked her through it, and her voice had a flatness I hadn't heard from her before. The sound of a lawyer recalculating a case in real time. Lachlan's counterattacking. This is a classic move when a civil complaint threatens someone who has more to lose than you do. Muddy the water. Make you the subject of an investigation instead of the man bringing one. Even if the SBI eventually clears you, and I believe they will, the complaint itself becomes something opposing counsel can wave around in front of a civil jury. It looks like there are two sides to this, Mr. Haynes, and juries love believing that everyone's a little bit guilty. What documentation could he possibly have? I never diverted a dollar. I don't know yet. That's what worries me. Lachlan doesn't do anything without preparing the paper first. If he's filed a complaint with documentation attached, he built that documentation before he needed it, the same way he built Walter Holdings 4 years before he needed that. I sat with that a long moment. The same cold recognition I'd felt looking at the words, Coral Bay Advisory Limited, on Lexi's screen. What do I do? You go in. You answer every question truthfully and completely because you have nothing to hide. And hiding anything now would be catastrophic. And you let me start pulling every West Coastal payment record I can get my hands on before he finishes building whatever story he's constructing to go with those documents. I went in 3 days later. Dale Ferris was younger than I expected. Careful, thorough, recording everything, and he asked me questions for 2 hours about payment structures and account access and signing authority, and I answered every one of them, plainly, the way I had learned, slowly, and at great cost, that plain answers were the only kind that survived contact with people who had spent years building lies. At the end, he sat back and looked at me for a moment. "Off the record, Mr. Haynes," he said. "The documentation Mr. West's attorney provided is thin. 2 invoices with your signature that look, to my eye, considerably cleaner than a signature usually looks after 40 years of use. I'm not closing this file yet. I have to run it properly regardless of what I think today. But I wanted you to leave here knowing I don't think you diverted a dollar from anybody." I thanked him and walked out into a gray February afternoon feeling something I had not expected to feel walking out of a state investigator's office. Relief, yes, but underneath the relief something harder and colder settling into place. Because Lydia's words kept turning over in my mind the whole drive back to Oliver's. He built that documentation before he needed it. Which meant somewhere in Lachlan West's files right now sat forged evidence with my signature on it, prepared in advance, waiting for exactly the moment I threatened him. And a man capable of preparing that kind of insurance policy years ahead of time was not a man who was going to stop simply because one investigator walked away unconvinced. That night my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Sal. Remy's voice rough, tired 4 months of silence packed into one syllable. "I need to see you tonight. Alone. I have something you need to see before this goes any further, and it can't wait for morning." Remy wanted to meet at the storage unit. Not Oliver's, not anywhere either of us was known to go. And when I pulled up, he was already there, leaning against his truck in the dark with his arms crossed, the way he used to stand, watching a pour he didn't fully trust. "You look like hell," I said. "Feel like it too." He didn't move to shake my hand, which wasn't like him, and I understood standing there that whatever he was about to tell me had been sitting heavy on him for a long time. "Sal, I need you to let me say the whole thing before you say anything back. I've been rehearsing it in my truck for 20 minutes, and if you interrupt me, I don't know that I'll get through it." "Go ahead." The night the truck window got broken, I went straight from that lot to a bar on Carolina Beach Road because my hands were shaking too bad to drive further. And while I was sitting there, a man I half recognized sat down next to me and bought me a beer and started asking questions. Foreman for West Coastal. He knew things about that night he shouldn't have known unless somebody had told him, and I understood inside about 2 minutes that somebody had been watching us a lot longer than one evening. Somebody was watching you, watching both of us. He offered me a job. Said Lachlan needed a foreman who understood commercial framing and didn't ask too many questions. Said the pay was good. Said it might be smart for a man in my position to take an opportunity like that instead of going down with a sinking ship. Remy looked at me steady. I said yes. The word landed in my chest exactly the way I'd been dreading it would for 4 months. And yet somehow, hearing him say it plainly, it landed differently than the dread had. I took the job because I understood. Sitting in that bar with my hands still shaking that I was never going to get anywhere near what Lachlan actually had on you, standing outside the fence looking in. I needed to be inside it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone, an old one, cheap, the kind you buy with cash and never register to your name. I've had this recording, every conversation I could get near for 40 days, Sal. Every crew meeting, every phone call I could position myself to overhear. I told them I needed the work, quiet, needed cash where possible, needed them not asking about my old employer. And they liked that. Made me look desperate. Desperate men don't get questioned. He set the phone down on the tailgate of his truck between us. "I stole your truck window story too, by the way," he said. And for the first time that night, something like his old dry humor came through. "Told them at West Coastal I'd heard a rumor you were investigating them. Figured it'd make me look useful and loyal to the wrong side." They ate it up. Didn't take them but a week after that to start talking a little too freely in front of the new guy, who clearly hated his old boss. I stood there in the dark of that storage lot and felt something break open in my chest that had been clenched tight since Carolina Beach Road. The image of his truck parked inside that fence, rearranging itself completely from betrayal into something that looked now almost unbearably like sacrifice. "You let me think you'd sold me out. I couldn't tell you. If you'd known and they'd sensed anything different in how you carried yourself around me, they'd have made me for what I was inside a week. I needed you to actually believe it, Sal. I'm sorry. I know what that cost you. I saw your face outside that fence that Sunday. I was in the trailer window. I watched you sit on the shoulder of the road for 10 minutes, and I couldn't do a single thing about it. You saw me. I saw you." His voice cracked slightly, the first crack I'd heard in it in 24 years. "That was the worst part of the whole 40 days, watching you sit there working it out, and not being able to walk over and tell you the truth." I picked up the phone off the tailgate. My hands were not entirely steady.
"What's on here?"
Lachlan on a recorded call 11 days ago, telling his attorney exactly which invoices to backdate for the SBI complaint. Estelle at the office 3 weeks back telling Lachlan she needs the Cayman transfer finalized before any discovery request could reach it, and him telling her not to worry, that Coral Bay's already restructured twice, and no American subpoena's ever going to see past the second layer. Remy looked at me, and 40 minutes of a foreman I trained personally admitting, drunk at that same bar, that Coastal Envelope Systems never touched Masonboro, and that West Coastal paid him directly to say otherwise if anybody ever asked. I stood in that dark lot holding a stranger's phone, with my whole case sitting inside it, and I looked at the man who had let me believe for 4 months that he had chosen the people who destroyed me over the man who had trained him. 24 years, I said, and I still doubted you. I gave you every reason to. Remy took his cap off, turned it over once in his hands and looked at me the way he used to look at a wall he'd already decided was out of plumb. "Now let's go show Lydia Burns what 40 days of being hated by everybody actually bought us." New Hanover County Superior Court sat in session on a Tuesday in April. Judge Winifred Pruitt on the bench, 63 years old, precise, unhurried. The kind of judge who had clearly stopped being impressed by expensive suits sometime in her first decade on the bench. The gallery was fuller than I expected. Alexander Oliver sat in the second row, in a jacket I had never seen him wear, and Zayden beside him, and Dale Ferris slipped in quietly near the back just before opening statements. There, he told me later, purely as an observer, though I suspected the State Bureau of Investigation had more than passing curiosity in how this particular morning would end. Roland Pike represented Estelle and Lachlan both, a joint defense that Lydia said told her more about their confidence than any opening statement could have. He was good. I want to say that plainly because it matters to what happened next. He took Lexi Salas apart for 40 minutes on cross-examination, forcing her to admit again and again that she could not trace the money past Coral Bay Advisory Limited, that everything past that wall was inference rather than proof, that a jury could not convict on a trail that simply stopped. "Miss Salas," he said, "you've built an impressive spreadsheet. What you haven't built is a single dollar you can actually follow into my client's pockets, have you?" "Not past the Cayman entity, no." "So this entire theory of yours rests on where the money might have gone, not where it did." "It rests on where it went until it stopped being traceable by conventional means. Lexi said steady, but I felt the room shift slightly, felt the weight of a year's work sitting on an answer that sounded out loud in that room, thinner than it had ever felt sitting across a folding table. He did the same to our signature expert an hour later, walking her through the mechanics of authorized signing agents and corporate signature stamps until the jury's faces had gone the particular blank that means a room has stopped following an argument closely enough to be persuaded by it. I sat at that table and felt something I had felt exactly once before, in Lydia's office, the day she told me one document wasn't enough. The floor tilting. The case I had built with a year of nights and a truck window and a foreman who'd spent 40 days pretending to hate me, suddenly looking in the cold fluorescent light of an actual courtroom like exactly what Pike kept calling it. A theory. Lydia leaned over during the recess. "This is the moment," she said quietly. "This is exactly where cases like this either die or turn. Stay with me." We called Camille after the break. I had not known until Lydia told me, 2 days earlier, under strict instruction not to react in the courtroom, that my daughter had spent 3 months inside her mother's new firm, collecting time-stamped design files that predated every falsified change order, that she had gone there not as a defector, but as the second undercover operation, running quietly alongside Remy's. That the call I'd watched her take on my cot 4 months earlier had been the first of dozens she'd fielded from Lydia's paralegal, coordinating what she could safely copy and when. She testified for 31 minutes. She produced the original structural drawings for the Oleander building, file-dated metadata intact, showing no revision anywhere near the northeast corner. She produced internal firm correspondence in which Estelle had asked her directly to backdate a set of drawings the previous month, a request Camille had refused and quietly preserved. Pike had almost nothing to ask her. What do you cross-examine against a daughter holding metadata her own mother had asked her to falsify? Otis Beaumont came next. He testified calm as he'd always been on any job site of mine, that he had returned to the Oleander building 3 nights after the failed coring attempt, alone, with a properly licensed testing technician and a chain of custody log initiated the moment the sample left the ground. He had not told me. He had done it, he said, because a man doesn't watch 2 amateurs get robbed in a parking lot and walk away without doing the job correctly himself. Pike tried to suggest bias, a friendship of 20 years clouding professional judgment, and Otis simply looked at him and said he'd failed contractors he liked plenty of times over the years and past ones he didn't care for, because the concrete never asked him how he felt about a man before it told him the truth. The sample confirmed under seal, under signature, under a chain, no attorney could pick apart, exactly what our stolen one had shown. No supplemental steel. Never had been. Remy's recordings went in last authenticated transcribed 40 days condensed into 11 minutes of Lachlan West's own voice instructing his attorney which invoices to backdate, and Estelle's voice flat and businesslike discussing a Cayman transfer with the same tone she'd once used discussing draw requests across our kitchen island. I watched the jury's faces while that recording played. I watched something settle in them that had not been there during Pike's cross of Lexi Salas. A stillness I recognized, because I had seen it before. On Otis Beaumont's face in a parking lot at midnight, on Judge Pruitt's face as she listened without once looking away from the speaker on her bench. Pike stood for his closing with considerably less certainty than he'd carried into the courtroom that morning. Judge Pruitt sent the case to the jury at 4:15 that afternoon. They were out for 2 hours and 11 minutes. The jury found Estelle Haynes and Lachlan West liable on 5 of the 6 causes of action, and awarded damages that would take years to fully collect, but existed now as a judgment with teeth a debt the law itself would help me chase. Judge Pruitt referred the recordings and Camille's documentation to the district attorney's office the same afternoon, and criminal charges followed within the month. Fraud. Conspiracy. In Estelle's case, embezzlement from the accounts of a company that still technically bore my name. At sentencing 4 months later, Lachlan stood when his turn came, and did something I had not expected. Though Lydia told me afterward she had seen it 100 times in cases exactly like this one. He turned toward Estelle at the defense table and pointed. "None of this was my idea," he said, his voice rising, control slipping, the way I remembered it slipping once before. in a much smaller room over a much smaller sum. She came to me 4 years ago. She had Walter Holdings running before I ever met Sal Haynes. She found me. She built this. The judge told him to sit down. He did not sit down right away, and the bailiff had to take a step toward him before he finally lowered himself back into his chair. And I watched Estelle's face while all of it happened. She did not look surprised. She looked for the first time since I had known her like a woman finally seeing something clearly that she had spent a great many years arranging not to see. That was the moment Camille told me later that something in their mother finally broke all the way through. Not the verdict, not the recordings. Watching the man she had built a second life around stand up in open court and throw her under the weight of it to save 4 fewer years for himself. Lachlan received 9 years. His development license was revoked in 3 states within the month, a fact that reached every bonding company and every county permit office on the coast faster than any court order could have traveled on its own. Because word moves through this industry the way it always has. Man to man, job site to job site. And there was not a general contractor or a lender from Wilmington to Charleston who did not by summer know exactly what Lachlan West had done and exactly who he had done it to. Nobody would extend him credit. Nobody would sign a permit with his name on it. He was not going to prison forever. He was, I came to understand, going to spend whatever came after in a version of the exile I had spent a year clawing my way out of, except with no Alexander Oliver waiting to open a door for him. Because a man reaps, eventually, the particular harvest of who he chose to be along the way. Estelle received 6 years and full restitution. I visited her once 3 weeks after sentencing at the women's facility outside Raleigh. I did not go for revenge. I went because Camille asked me to, and because some accounting in me needed to close in person rather than through a court filing. She looked smaller across that visitation table than she had ever looked across our kitchen island. "Did you know," she asked, "that he'd do that? Point at me like that?" "I didn't know him the way you did," I said. "But I know men who panic. I watched one panic in my own kitchen once over $800,000. It's not a complicated thing to recognize the second time." She was quiet a long moment. "I thought even after everything that whatever else happened, I'd still have him waiting." "I know. I don't have anything now." I did not offer her comfort, because I did not have any true comfort left to offer. And offering false comfort felt like one more lie in a story that already had too many. I said what I had come to say, which was that Camille loved her still, in whatever complicated way a daughter loves a mother who has done what she had done. And that I hoped she used the years ahead of her to become someone worth that love. And then I stood up and left. And I have not gone back since. I rebuilt Haynes Commercial Construction that year, smaller, leaner, a name on a new set of trucks with Remy as full partner, and Zayden running his own crew, and Camille designed the new office herself, a converted warehouse near the river with good light and no long table. Anyone could be seated at the far end of. We took our first contract in September, a modest tenant build-out on Front Street. Nothing like Cape Fear Landing in scale, but ours, clean, every invoice matched to actual work, every signature mine and mine alone. Alexander Oliver supplied the lumber at his usual terms and refused again to let me pay him back for the months he'd carried me. And I stopped arguing with him about it because some debts are meant to be carried forward rather than settled. I still carry the pen. I found it in a drawer in what used to be my desk. Recovered during discovery, returned to me in a manila envelope with a property receipt stapled to the front. I keep it in my shirt pocket, the way I always did. And some mornings, standing on a new foundation, watching a new pour go in, I take it out and turn it over in my fingers the way she used to. And I think about a woman who once told a 27-year-old man on the hood of his truck that a signature was worth trusting. She was right about that, as it turns out. Just not about which signatures, and not for the reasons either of us believed at the time. I have thought a great deal in the years since about what this whole thing actually taught me. And I want to leave you with the honest answer rather than a tidy one. It is this. A signature is not trust. Trust is what lets a signature go unread. For 34 years, I mistook the second thing for the first, and I am not the only man my age who has made that particular mistake, handing over the parts of his life that matter most to the person closest to him, simply because asking questions felt somehow like a kind of betrayal in itself. It isn't. Asking is not betrayal. Silence dressed up as trust is what costs you everything. I think, too, about the men who showed up for me when I had nothing left to offer them. A foreman who spent 40 days being hated so I could have a fighting chance. A hardware store owner who handed a stranger a set of keys because character is worth more than a credit check. A daughter who came back even after I pushed her away first. I built buildings for 41 years, and it turns out the sturdiest thing I ever built was never made of steel or concrete at all. If any part of this reached you, if you have ever sat at your own table and felt like furniture nobody remembered inviting, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every one of them. And if you believe the way I've come to believe, that it is never too late in life to pick your own pen back up, stay with this channel. There are more stories like this one coming about men who were counted out and were not finished yet. Thank you for staying until the very end. Genuinely.